Capital Views is sponsored by Northrim Bank, Alaska Oil and Gas Association, ConocoPhillips, and Linden.
Hi, I'm Tim Bradner with Capital Views, and welcome today to Commissioner of Environmental Conservation, Emma Pokon, at the Department of Environmental Conservation. Welcome today, Commissioner.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And Commissioner, you have been Deputy Commissioner at the department for several years now, so you kind of know the ropes.
Yeah,
So
I've been
we,
here for about 4 years now at DEC, and I've actually been in state service since about 2013. I came over from the Department of Law. And before that, I actually also had the opportunity to work for the North Slope Borough for about a period of about 3 years. So I've had a good career so far in public service.
well, that also gives you a good background on the issues that you're dealing with. I wanted to ask about Fairbanks air quality issues and the issues with EPA. This has been something obviously on the mind of Fairbanks community leaders for a long time, but you recently were able to, as I recall, EPA's default, if they couldn't arrive at a workable solution, was to require the community to use ultra low sulfur diesel, which is diesel or heating oil with the sulfur extracted, very expensive for the community. And you managed to, your department managed to persuade EPA to back off that and go to other alternatives. And maybe you could talk about that for a few minutes because that sounds like a real accomplishment.
Yeah, I think, I guess just as general background, the Fairbanks area has been in non-attainment for particulate matter pollution for some time now. And under the Federal Clean Air Act, as more time goes by with an area in non-attainment, they require stricter and stricter requirements, more onerous requirements to try to get the air into what's called attainment. And so for this last plan submission that we had, EPA was keenly interested in having us require ultra low sulfur diesel for home heating. And there are a couple outs for measures that EPA might otherwise wish to require, one of which is economic feasibility. And so I think being able to do our homework and do the math around what the actual expense would be for Fairbanks residents to have that measure put in place, and comparing that against the actual emissions that come from that source, we were able to convince them that it just wasn't economically feasible, that it wasn't a good idea for Fairbanks and the Fairbanks community to put that measure in place.
Yeah, just by way of frame of reference, as I recall, ultra low sulfur diesel cost about $1 a gallon more than regular heating oil in Fairbanks.
That sounds about right. I think it varies from time to time as any, oil or petroleum product. It'll vary as the markets vary, but that sounds about right. Yeah.
And since Fairbanks is heavily dependent on using the oil for heat, that could have a pretty dramatic impact had EPA put that into effect.
Yeah, and I think another part of the variable too is that as we're talking about home heating, the core issue for us with the air quality in Fairbanks is actually wood stoves and wood stove heating. So if we make that home heating oil more expensive, it has the potential to drive more people to burn more wood, and that actually has been a more significant contributor to the air quality problem. So we've really wanted to focus on how do we reduce that wood smoke, and how do we provide support to the community, understanding that being able to go out and cut wood and dry it and burn it and be self-sustaining in that way is really important to the community. We don't want to end up in a position where wood stoves aren't allowed at all. That's not a measure that we want to put in place or want to consider for the community. So we've really been focused on trying to get more efficient wood stoves so that the emissions from that burning is reduced. The natural gas conversions, I think, have been really helpful as well. But of course, we also have to strike a balance, right? Like not everybody is going to be in a position where they can, not burn wood on cold days. If that's your source of heat for your home, you need to be able to heat your home. So we do have also what are called no alternative source of heat waivers for folks that actually really do need to be burning wood, and even on those bad air quality days. I know that that's been a source of deep concern for a lot of Fairbanks and North Pole residents, about whether or not they're going to have that heating option available. So I guess the bad news is that it's the emissions from those wood stoves that are really contributing to the air quality issue. The good news is that for those folks that do need that heating source, we have a pathway forward that allows them to continue using those wood stoves.
And also, there are new technologies on wood stoves too that could reduce that, I gather. Um, how did you persuade EPA to back off an ultra low sulfur diesel? The impression I got is that was just sort of an easy out for EPA just to mandate that requirement.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the sulfur emissions from heating oil are a contributor to the PM pollution. So in looking at overall what's creating the PM, that is a contributing factor. But it really was, I think, doing the math around what's the actual expense, what's the availability, and measuring that against what contribution is that source making to the air quality problem, and is the cost worth the benefit that we would be getting? I think given how long the problem has persisted, it was a pretty high hurdle to convince them that that trade-off wasn't appropriate for ultra low sulfur fuel in the community. But ultimately, I think we were able to do the math and show that it wasn't an appropriate measure at this time.
Uh, is the is ultra low sulfur, or rather, is sulfur high sulfur a significant contributor to the air pollution relative to wood stoves? Wood stoves is the most important contributor.
Yeah, it's I believe, if I recall the numbers off the top of my head, that wood stoves are something like 85 or 90% of the contribution. What we see on the air filters on the monitors is some contribution of sulfur. And that we know that contribution is coming from some of the home heating oil. It's just a small contributor compared to the magnitude of the cost that it would generate for the community.
Well, meanwhile, the power plants in Fairbanks, of course, they're coal plants, but are they also contributing to this? Or are they able to install scrubbers and other sorts of technology?
Yeah, and that had been proposed and something that we examined with the EPA about whether or not pollution control measures on the utilities would make sense and would help solve the problem. Our experts had long said that, on inversion days when we have that poor air quality, that the utility stacks are actually emitting well above the inversion layer. So they aren't, even though they have some sulfur emissions, that they're not actually contributing to the unhealthy air. We didn't have the chemistry, we didn't have the science for a long time to demonstrate that in the modeling. But quite recently, actually, with the support of EPA and a number of other partners, we were able to do the science. We have it in hand now to show that the sulfur chemistry and how that turns into PM in the cold environment, and together with where those emissions are happening, we now know that the utilities aren't contributing to the unhealthy air. And so as a consequence, we are in a position where we can convince EPA that we should not be requiring the hundreds of millions of dollars worth of pollution control technologies for those facilities, or the tens of millions of dollars of investment that we had initially been asking for. Now that we have that science, now that we know, we're in a position to ensure that the measures we do require are addressing the actual pollution problem, and the investments will be effective.
Well, I could just imagine what that effect would have been on local electricity rates in power.
Right.
Yeah. Well, then both Commissioner, thank you very much for joining us. It's a complex problem, but it looks like you've done some good work here. So congratulations.
Thank you, and I'll give credit to the team in our air quality division and in their hard work over years to understand the problem and to ensure that we have measures that are really targeted at helping the community and that are most effective.
Great. Well, thanks, Commissioner, for joining us today.
Thank you very much.